So, with apologies to Rogers and Hammerstein, raindrops on podcasts, and whiskers on Reddit, these are a few of my participatory culture favorite things. Participatory cultures, defined by Henry Jenkins as cultures with relatively low barriers to artistic expression and civic engagement, strong support for creating and sharing one's creations, and some type of informal mentorship whereby what is known by the most experienced is passed along to novices. Jenkins goes on to note that a participatory culture is also one in which members believe their contributions matter and feel some degree of social connection with each other. At the least, they care what other people think about what they have created. And Jenkins goes on to list some forms of participatory culture. This little definition in this 2006 white paper Jenkins and some of his colleagues wrote sums up very well my own experience of participatory cultures, why I keep finding new ones, why I keep going back and contributing to some of the earliest ones that I discovered, and why I think the model of participatory cultures can matter so much for education, particularly, but not exclusively, for higher education, especially when, in David Wiley's words, disposable assignments help to convince students their contributions don't matter. Why not take a page from participatory cultures and think about how we might reframe that? I tried to do that early on with creating websites on the World Wide Web. I started doing that as soon as I figured out how. So a colleague of mine named Bill Kemp and I put our heads together and devised a first-year composition sequence asking students what their favorite recording was, what we would call a desert island disc, back in the days of physical media. And we asked students to do several assignments related to their desert island disc. This was one of those assignments, at the end of which we asked them to give us their final projects, and we would post them to the World Wide Web. But when someone from Africa wrote a student to say, "Your essay on Tupac Shakur speaks for me," and did that 2 years after the paper had been put online, I knew we had something very special going. In 2002, I discovered internet discussion forums. I was a great believer in Usenet, loved that, but this was something else. I had Googled to try to find out why a particular recording had sounded so bad. And at that point, Google was mature enough to start to give me some highly relevant answers, which brought me to a music forum online, a discussion forum. It was on vBulletin initially, that was run by a mastering and audio engineer named Steve HOFFMAN, a guy with a lot of expertise, a lot of inside stories about making great-sounding records, and it turned out that his expertise was a great draw for other people with intense interests and intense kinds of expertise of their own. What we got out of all of this internet discussion was an extraordinary information resource for anyone who cares about how things sound, cares about music, cares about audio hardware, really cares about anything having to do with video or audio. No bit of geekery is too small. This is me interacting with one of the senior members of the forum quite recently about various pressings of a sublime recording of George Shearing and Nat King Cole working together back in the 1950s. Once you've found that kind of affiliation, once you've found that kind of niche, and you're in a global light-speed telecommunications network, well, Bob's your uncle, as they say in the UK. You find that what you thought was your own private obsession is actually shared by many, many people, some of whom are far more obsessive than you are, and will actually be able to feed your obsession in some particularly interesting and rewarding ways. I've been on that forum now for 15 years, and wouldn't go a week without it. As with all participatory cultures, especially internet discussion forums that can get very contentious, a lot of the success depends on the rules for the forum. Since discussions about audio and recording technologies tend to be quite contentious, maybe not as much as theology or politics, but since some aspects of theology are probably included in talking about stereo reproduction, they can be pretty tense at times. And you need to empower certain people to be moderators. You need to do it in a way that doesn't make them like police. It makes them benign. It makes them guardians in ways that everybody would want to respect, and people would look at, not in a punitive way, but in a way that really is about looking around at folks who help to make this a place you'd want to be. These moderators on the Steve Hoffman Forum are called Gorts. Gort was the robot from The Day the Earth Stood Still. So it's great to see the Gorts present on the Steve Hoffman Forum. And it's a stunning instance of what Seymour Papert calls microcultures in his book, The Children's Machine, where he describes microcultures as a way in which you have little inside jokes, little things you can share, avatars, SIG files, things about yourself that will help you be acquainted with other people, basically creating a feeling of community. And you need to do that in a very deliberate and mindful way. And the Gorts will help keep you in line and help make sure that the free flow of information and an atmosphere of civility as well as passion characterizes what you're doing. Those are my 2 discussion forum rules. As you can see here, passion is encouraged, civility is required. This is not an open forum, because if it were, it would start to attract a lot of bots and a lot of trolls from the outside, because they tend to prey on PHP BB discussion forums. So I don't typically open these forums up, but I do like to assign them in particular courses as a way for students to begin to see the course itself as an instance of a participatory culture. I want students to think of themselves as colleagues for each other, and I very much want them to think of the course of study as a shared experience that's not limited to what Dr. C is saying when we're all in the same room, is not limited to tests and assignments. Those are important things. But most of all, I want them to look at each other when the course of study is over and have that feeling that they'd like to keep it going. And while it's nice if the teacher is there, that's not completely necessary. And in fact, I once had a discussion forum, same software, PHP BB, it's free, that ran for months after the class was over. It ran even after I had left that particular institution and gone to another university, because students thought of it as a kind of a clubhouse, a place for them. All participatory culture has, in my experience, that feel of a special community where the content is important, but the exchange of that content and the way that those contributions are showcased is very, very important. It gives you a certain feel for that culture. As I said before, a certain vibe. I always liked the vibe of Flickr, even though Yahoo seems to have done most of what it could, alas, to mess that vibe up. Flickr's still there. Flickr still matters. In a world where everybody's taking photographs, and that's a great thing, by and large, Flickr is a place for people who are a little bit more serious about their photographs. Flickr is also a great way to discover the wider world of serious photography. This particular spot in Flickr, called the Commons, introduces you to photographic galleries across a number of governmental and community and nonprofit and higher education contexts. And it's a useful reminder that the Library of Congress itself posted a number of photographs in the public domain up on Flickr, where people could comment on them, exchange insights into the contexts, annotate them, tag them, essentially use them as a platform for shared learning. You can do a search on Google Images to get you to images you can use on a Creative Commons license or because they're in the public domain. But in my experience, that's a little hit or miss. The search engine on Flickr to get you to specific licenses is much more reliable in my experience, because typically the creators have had to make a choice about tagging or indicating the kind of license that their images have. I would be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about Wikipedia, one of the great sites for participation on the web. As I like to say, it's certainly not perfect, but it is miraculous. Wikipedia becomes a place that really does, I think, constitute a learning environment, probably the richest and most interesting online learning environment in the world today. It's always a challenge to get people to participate in Wikipedia, though it's also fair to say that Wikipedia has done a great deal to position itself as a participatory culture and to rise to the challenge of various underrepresented populations or neglected opportunities to widen participation. If you're curious about badging or micro-credentialing, you can have that experience on Wikipedia as well. This is my user page. It's often said that Wikipedia is anonymous. You can certainly be anonymous on Wikipedia, but many editors are not anonymous. They want to be known. They want to be able to participate in the culture and have an identity as someone who's contributed in specific ways. Now, the logical question is, how did I get all of these badges? And the answer is, I got them by being part of the Wikipedia adventure. I recommend this very highly. If you've never edited Wikipedia, first of all, you should. I'm just going to say this. Everyone in higher education who has ever consulted Wikipedia should learn how to edit Wikipedia, because otherwise you're not really participating in the culture. You're simply in a consumer culture, and we have enough of that. If you can get to the Wikipedia adventure and spend an hour going through the various tutorials and experiences that have been created for you, you will, I think, have an extremely rich experience. And I know that by the end of the experience, you will have a number of really cool badges on your user page. So I recommend that very highly and hope that a number of you will get to the Wikipedia adventure and begin your own Wikipedia journey. I will also credit here my wife, the roving librarian, who has introduced me to the Wikipedia adventure and run at least 2 Wikipedia editathons herself. If you're curious about Wikipedia editathons, and I encourage you to be curious about them, I will refer you to the Wikipedia page on Wikipedia editathons, where you'll find all the instructions and all the help you need. There are also aspects of Wikipedia that are, I think, stirring to consider, not just because of the information they convey, but because of the way they signal Wikipedia's own awareness of itself as a participatory culture. I don't know of anything more intense along those lines on Wikipedia than the page on deceased Wikipedians, people who've contributed in extraordinary ways, often over many years, sometimes from the very founding of Wikipedia. You can find there, for example, the user page of Aaron Swartz, because each of the entries on deceased Wikipedians will lead you to that individual's user page, and you'll see the statistics of their contributions. You will see the condolences that have been left by people who value their contributions. You get a sense of the way in which so many people working together over time can build something much, much bigger than any of us could possibly build on our own. On a little less of a somber note, but no less participatory, here's something that I've never contributed to. I'm only a lurker so far, but I'm a lurker with intense admiration for an archive of our own. It's called AO3 by its aficionados, and it's a place to collect fandom and fan creations, everything that fans do to transform the works that they love into something they can share, fan fiction, things having to do with music. It's really a wonderland, and I recommend it to you. This is a platform also where I lurk but benefit enormously. Tumblr, I think of it as blogging for images, or where images love to go to be shared in a particular context of information. It's not really Flickr, it's not really Instagram. It's sort of easy blogging with lots of great pictures, and I enjoy going there, and I enjoy following certain Tumblrs on there. One of them, just to keep that roving librarian thread going, is the Tumblr for VCU libraries, where there are images from special collections and archives, the kinds of things where you sort of have to be there, unless you're on Tumblr, and then you can get a real sense of what is there and begin to expand your horizons. Tumblr's also a great home for medievalists and illuminated manuscripts. It's a great home for lots of different communities. One in particular I follow is Saving Nez's Posts. We're back to music again. Michael Nesmith is, of course, a former guitarist and singer for the Monkees, and he's somebody who posts really interesting things to Facebook. These essays that he writes. Who knew he was such a literate fellow? Somebody on Tumblr has made it their crusade to save his posts, and they post them to Tumblr, and that's where I read them. Thank you. Now let's talk about Reddit. Reddit is the front page of the internet. I find it endlessly fascinating. I do have an account on Reddit. It's something I want to know better. There are places on Reddit you probably don't want to go. There are certainly places I haven't been. It's like everything else in civilization, a lot of everything, and not all of it is pretty. However, Reddit does have a very interesting system for encouraging participation, for encouraging the formation of niche communities in what are called subreddits, and for helping people figure out exactly how what they are sharing can be impactful. This happens in participatory cultures. If you stick around, if you begin to think hard about not just how you're participating, but how to generate participation, some interesting things can begin to happen. You can begin to understand what kinds of information, what kinds of titles, what kinds of context are likely to get people to engage. Several subreddits are of great interest to me. This is one of my favorites. It's called Today I Learned. I think of this as the participatory culture for sharing education with each other. It's certainly not a formal place for that to happen, but it's a fascinating place to see learning going on in the wild. No credit hours, no grades in sight. Really quite inspiring, and I think it is, in fact, philosophically aligned with a lot of what we talk about when we talk about open learning and open pedagogy and open education generally. So I loved this post, of course, when Terry Green posted it to the Open Learning 17 site and formally lodged a petition to adopt Reddit into the Open Ed family. I say formally, actually, there's no place to sign this, although you're welcome to come and comment on it. But the point is this, that Reddit, for Terry Green, and I think for a lot of people, is a place where an authentic, engaged community can be found and can be nurtured, and let this be a lesson to us all. What do all those things together give us, Terry writes, and he says, we end up with a place where we can create our own community, easily contribute ideas and things, discuss and vote on, give more or less visibility. If the open education community were to post the awesome things that they find or do on Reddit, say anything that someone would tweet out, we would have a stream with a little more permanence than a Twitter feed. And Terry goes on to describe some of the subreddits that he finds particularly interesting. It's an inspiring post. I hope you'll come to openlearninghub.net and look for it. And then I hope you will consider adopting Reddit as part of your practice. As I consider it and bring this to a close, before I put it up on the Participatory Culture platform called YouTube, it occurs to me that a lot of what I've done in my own practice over the years with the web, with discussion forums, with really whatever I ask students to do as a form of e-participation, really is aimed at having students develop a sense of the class itself as a participatory culture, with all of that richness, all of that hospitality, some of the informality and readiness to share that I think can characterize informal and sometimes formal learning at its best. So I'll close with this screenshot of the Mother blog, which is running right now on my form and theory, I should say, of poetry class at Virginia Commonwealth University. The Mother blog, a concept I got a long time ago from Barbara Ganley, a thing like a mothership that I think of in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the thing that's out there in the clouds, above us all, where we all write the course into being together, where the fact of the course as a participatory culture transcends all the assignments, all the grades, all of us, and maybe a place where we can, in fact, meet, participate, and feel that our contributions matter.